Hello, I'm Eric Hoernke, and this is my spoiler review for John Wick Chapter 3, Parabellum. It is directed by Chad Stahelski. I'm not sure if I get that name right, but he's directed pretty much nothing but John Wick, and between him and Keanu Reeves, they've made quite a career out of... Keanu Reeves had quite the career before John Wick, but he'd kind of been, I don't know if down on his luck is the proper word, but kind of out of the mix. And with this is definitely a career resurgence for Keanu and a burgeoning directorial career for Chad Stahelski, who used to be just a stuntman. So in John Wick Chapter 3, it starts right where the second one left off, with John Wick running for his life after killing a man on continental grounds. And it was a very high energy cliffhanger ending. And so because of that, John Wick is looking for anything. He seems broke, he seems beaten, but we know our movie hero protagonists, and while broken and battered, he will find a way, right? So he got lured into the events of the second chapter based on this guy having a marker, right? So it turns out he has two things in his hands which allows him to continue moving. One, he has one of these markers, which Halle Berry's character, one of the new characters, owes him. And he also has this passport of sorts, I guess, from apparently where he was raised, where he was reared, where I guess he got a lot of his skills, which is sort of Russian or Eastern European. I forget, they might have said which country, but anyway, some sort of Eastern European sort of mafia-ish organization that's run by Anjelica Huston. So, and in seeing Anjelica Huston, he gets out of the city, and in meeting the Halle Berry character, he manages to meet another character, apparently the one above the table, which we learned throughout the last thing. There's this high table which apparently governs this whole assassin culture that John Wick exists in, and it's constantly browbeaten into us that they're pretty much this omnipotent force and nobody's above them, and how dare you cross them, yada, yada, yada. In any case, so John Wick is now on the outs, and he's seeking a way, and he's got to do one of two things, right, through this narrative. He's either got to find a way, he's either got to tear down the entire system, which is where I thought the story was heading, or he's got to find his way back in. And in seeing this one above the table, I'm mixing it up with that Marvel dude, the one above all. In any case, in seeing this guy, the man offers him a way back in. And he takes it. He ends up going back to New York and ends up back at the Continental. And meanwhile, the high table, I guess unbeknownst to them, the high table has been sort of seeking reparations against the folks who were perceived to have aided John Wick in this process. One was Anjelica Huston, another was the Bowery King, Morpheus, right, played by Lawrence Fishburne, and then the Continental and Winston specifically. They try to take this all comes in the form of the Adjudicator, another new character, and so they attempt to either supplant Winston, and when that fails, they basically deconsecrate, or basically removing the Continental from this HOA, I guess, of sorts, this group that the high table oversees. And once it's deconsecrated, it's basically a free-for-all on the grounds of the hotel. And John Wick fights them, along with, at this point, the help, because Winston is trying to keep his power, and he has the Continental. He has, I guess, possession is 9/10 of the law, and he has the loyalty of the people at the Continental, and so the high table fights them. And then, bang, 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 action. John Wick ends up fighting through the whole thing, getting to the top, where it's the Adjudicator, Winston, and John Wick all in this final sort of showdown. And the Adjudicator basically just gives Winston back, reconsecrates, gives Winston back the hotel, And Winston probably shoots John Wick, and he falls to his apparent death. Although, we've come to like Winston, although we know he's kind of out for himself. We also don't think that he would just kill John Wick. So I think the whole intent was to make it look like he was following orders, but then allow John Wick to live, which is what happened. So that being said, so that's kind of the overall, that's obviously the synopsis of the movie. So this franchise has taken a very interesting course. About the only other franchise, and there's a couple, but Fast and the Furious really jumps to my mind, although they did it much larger, because Fast and the Furious now are making billion-dollar movies. But they started out from these really humble beginnings, and then they found they had a harsh, I guess for them, they had a very delineating line from 4 to 5, where they completely sort of changed their modus operandi and became something much larger and much more entertaining than they had been. With John Wick, it's been a different sort of progression, but a similar idea where, so the first one is a very simple premise, and then the action was based on this very like staccato economy of action that the director put forth, right? And Keanu Reeves did excellent with the material. He did excellent. He looks so great as John Wick. Always looks amazing in this role. And went through, and I think there are YouTube videos out there, went through some intensive firearms training to look very, very natural, very realistic with his portrayal of these action gunfight sequences. But in any case, in that first film, it was a very simple premise, going after guy X, waded through a bunch of dudes with his very like efficient violence to get to this end goal. And in the second one, the production got a bit bigger. The stakes were a bit higher. You could see a bit more larger set piece action type things, but it was still this economical action. A lot of the fight scenes were, and at the end of 2, we roll into 3, and once again, more profile, higher profile. It's moved out of its February time frame, where we're done very well, to May, signaling that, hey, we now understand that this is a cash crop and it's a summer blockbuster. So in we walk to chapter 3, and there are action sequences in there that get much larger. So this is a dual-edged sword, because I think John Wick made his initial, our initial investment is in this very economical style of action. But with the larger production value, the higher profile, the larger story, the tendency is to want to make these larger set-piece action sequences. And I think in this situation, there are some that work, and there are some that don't work. And we'll get into that. Let's discuss briefly some of the newer characters, the new characters. Pretty much all the characters that survived the last film are returning, and then we add some new characters. Like we said, most notably Anjelica Huston in the form of a previous, seemingly almost like a mother figure. It reminds me of sort of a Red Sparrow-ish, like not in Russia or wherever, but in New York City, but a sort of Red Sparrow-ish containment of children who are just in this mafia, being trained in hand-to-hand combat and weapons and all this stuff. And I guess we're intended to understand that this is where John got his training back in the day, and we don't know where his evolution took him from when he left. But in any case, when he left, somehow he got this passage, and he gives it to Anjelica Huston, and apparently this breaks all ties with what would be his family, I guess, or his former family. In any case, Anjelica Huston's character was fine, and I like that little bit. Maybe showing a little bit of his background, but not digging too deep into it. Once again, I think a lot of these films do too much about exposing characters' background. I think the new James Bond stuff does that. I don't really need to know where James Bond comes from. The fact that he's a badass, the fact that he's a spy, it's enough for me. I don't need to know all that other stuff, right? It's half the enjoyment is the mystery of some of these characters and how John Wick came to be this guy. I don't need that origin story. I don't want to see that origin story. It's good enough for me to know that John Wick is this badass and he can do all this stuff, and that everybody thinks he is the patron saint of assassin boogeymen. I mean, that's cool. So, and then there's the character of the Adjudicator, which I like the character, but in 2 we had an assassin, more like a bodyguard assassin figure played by Ruby Rose. And while this person is much higher profile, higher power character, that whole like the androgynous sort of gender fluid binary female, it just seems like I've seen that before in the Ruby Rose character. It's like if I hadn't seen Ruby Rose, I would have really liked the Adjudicator. And I still like her. It just seems like the same character almost. Like, although the Ruby Rose character was silent, but so I mean, I would have preferred to see something a little bit different. Then there's the Halle Berry character, which is most notably present in the promotional material. And for as much as she's in the trailers and stuff, she's only in an actual short part of the movie. And her part is done very well. And the fight sequence with her is one of the best fight sequences in the film, with her and her dogs and John Wick. I like that quite a bit. Oh, and we get to see Bronn from Game of Thrones. I thought that was a very nice, you don't get to see very many Game of Thrones actors and extras popping up, and there was Bronn. That was kind of cool. Playing, I don't know, some guy who runs something in Africa for the High Table. In any case, they had to go see him about a guy. So, and then there's the one above the table who, that was a bit hokey, how it was, they just like, walk into the desert and you'll eventually, until you die, and he'll find you, which exactly what happened, which is just weird. And then it turns out to be this chic guy and in this tent, and who looked familiar, but I was just like, I don't know, I guess I was looking for something maybe a bit more impressive out of the one who sits above the table. I was like, this is it? This is the guy? I'm like, okay, whatever. In any case, so then he sends John back and to fight. And then the last really major third new character is Zero, who runs this little ninja thing that the High Table, the Adjudicator, sort of contracts to basically hunt down and kill John Wick. And God, the guy looks super familiar, and I couldn't place him, and I had to actually look him up. And he played the same guy who played Manny in the Brotherhood of the Wolf from like 2001. And I just rewatched that movie, and I remember thinking, like, man, I've never seen this guy in anything else. And now here he comes popping up in John Wick Chapter 3. So that was very interesting to see. Mark Dacascos, I think is his name. And interesting to see him show back up after, I don't know where he was, but in any case, so so my disappointments in the film, the action, like I spoke of, and like I said, it's a dual-edged sword, and some of the action sequences really worked for me. The action sequence with Halle Berry I thought was very well done, and the action sequence in the Continental with the concierge, all that, fighting the High Table forces, all that worked really well and kind of was larger versions, but also harkened back to what made John Wick good, which was this very economical, fast-paced boom, boom, boom action. Where the action failed to me in John Wick is they make some of these grander set pieces, and like the set piece of like the motorcycles and like John on the horse, that all looked really good. It seemed a little bit hokey, but actually it looked really good in the movie. So I'll give that a pass. But the one that sticks in my head is like the ninja dude Zero and his little assassins. So they seem to be these super badasses, and then they meet John Wick, who is supposed to be, an even larger badass. And the fight between them just seemed very weird. It seemed the one fight where Keanu Reeves really was showing his age, like he seemed clunky, and then they slowed way down to almost match him rather than him stepping up to match them. And, not for once, it was like watching Lethal Weapon 4 and knowing in my heart, like, there's no way Mel Gibson beats Jet Li, right? And I'm watching these guys, I'm like, there's no way Keanu Reeves beats these guys. But yet, for the narrative, John Wick has to be better than them. And he gets beat, but then he gets one over on him, right? And then also these guys had this weird sort of, through the whole thing, these guys, including the Zero, had this weird sort of reverence for John Wick that was just so tonally weird. Like, it seemed like at one point they stopped and like he gave them a pass and they gave him a pass, and I was just like, that sequence was just odd to me. That whole fight sequence, and then that was the end of the action. Like fighting Zero and fighting his cronies were like the pinnacle. I mean, that was the climactic moment, which leads me into my main problem with the movie is that the story goes nowhere. Like if you watch it, it is this complete circle, and then he ends up right back where we started. So at the end of 2, you're like, all right, this is what 3 is going to do. It's going to be this battle with him against the High Table or the forces of the High Table, you know, and maybe it'll continue past 3, but at least we're going to get this sort of monster confrontation. And really that doesn't happen. Like the only thing that happens, like he goes through all this stuff to get right back, and right at the end, he's on the outs with the Continental as Winston gets the place reconsecrated. He's still being sought after by the High Table, who he still doesn't know where or when. The only real two things he has at the end of this, and obviously he's going to use the one to spur action into 4, is he knows where this one above the table is, sort of. I don't know if he could find him. And I thought for sure he was going to re-find that guy, because that guy ended up taking his ring finger. And I thought for sure, like, oh, he's going to come back. Like, that's going to be a thing. And it didn't wind up being a thing, at least not in this movie. And then, like, the Bowery King they intimated at the end that him and the Bowery King are going to go in together. So Neo and Morpheus back together again, fighting the forces of the Matrix, essentially. So that's where we're at. And it seemed almost silly because John Wick had no allies, and he used his 2 cards in this one, his 2 get-out-of-jail-free cards, it seemed like, in this one. So he was out of allies. Yet the High Table made more enemies by punishing the people who had aided John Wick, which is why the Bowery King is going to now help him in the first. So that all seems ridiculous and silly, and I feel like we were kind of gypped out of the story we thought we were going to get. So now we have to wait until chapter 4 to maybe get that story. I don't know, like, because, and I understand what they're doing. They've understood now that this is a high profitable franchise, and they want to keep it going. But if you're going to do that, you should find a way to make the story grow organically rather than just tread water, which is what this last chapter did. John Wick is basically just treading water as they throw bad guys at him. And so that is my ultimate disappointment with the movie. But basically, I mean, I sound overly critical, but I did greatly enjoy this movie, and I do greatly look forward to chapter 4. I just wish they would have advanced the story more than the 0 advancement of the story that they did. So, good movie, worth your time, highly entertaining. Those are my criticisms of it. Overall, I would give this a B in a grading scale. So. That's it. My review of John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum. Hope you enjoyed it.